In her provocative and controversial work, Three Women's Texts and a Critique of Imperialism, what stories Spivak leaves untold? What aspects of the section on Frankenstein can further be examined? Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is the third story in Spivak's text. It is analyzed after Bronte's Jane Eyre and Rhys's White Sargasso Sea. In this work, Spivak's critique is about how even feminist texts of the time could not escape from the glorification of the social mission of the colonizer, continuation of epistemic violence through the text, and the way in which feminism became complicit in the imperial project. As the critics also mention, Spivak's examination of Frankenstein is less in-depth than the first two texts. I will explore the reasons of Spivak's lesser focus on Frankenstein after I introduce two important characters in Frankenstein's story. Safie, who has an Arab Christian mother and a Turkish father, and I will dive into the representation of the Turk as the other. I am Umut Özkaleli. Once again, welcome. Happy to meet you in Hopeful Theories. Please don't forget to subscribe, get your coffee or tea, and let's dive into exploring Safie and the Western other, the Turk. Safie's Turkish merchant father faces discrimination in Paris due to his religion and class. The trial leads to a death sentence, even though he is innocent of the charges. Felix, the wealthy son of the Laceys family, who follows the trial, reacts strongly to the injustices in the system and wants to help the man. Even though he never plans to allow it, her father, the Turk, agrees in exchange for Felix helping him escape. Once freed, the father tries to prevent Safie from marrying Felix and wants to keep her by his side. Safie rebels against her father and leaves to be with Felix. At this point, certain cliches are used, very fitting for the 18th century liberalism depicted in Mary Shelley's writing. What are they? The Muslim father is evil, cruel, and tyrannical. Even though Christians might have shown prejudice against him by imprisoning him and sentencing him to death, he is not a good character. He is a victim of prejudice on the one hand, but on the other hand, when you compare him to the mother, the Christian Arab is better, purer, and more authentic. The writing presents the Christian mother as somewhat enslaved under the Muslim father. Mary Shelley portrays Safie's father through cunning and ungratefulness, which are stereotypical images of the Muslim other. Shelley uses Safie's rebellion against her father as a symbol of women's liberation. She tries to convey the image that a woman who wants to be free, a woman who becomes self-aware, can no longer stay with her cruel, tyrannical Turkish father and can only actualize herself by being with a Western man. But what is interesting is that we never actually hear Safie's own voice. By presenting Safie with a certain image alongside a Western man, they want us to perceive Safie as liberated. But in reality, you don't see her as a woman who has much of her own voice in the book. She never speaks. Who then is Felix, the man Safie unites and finds her silenced liberation? Because Felix saves the Turkish father from the unjust clutches of justice, his entire family is first imprisoned by the authorities in Paris. Stripped of their wealth and status, they are then exiled to Germany, living in destitution in a village. Even in their life in the little cottage, Felix is portrayed as a character who is physically weak, constantly working and sacrificing himself for his sister and blind father, even giving them his share at the table. I think this is very important because allegorically, as far as I can see, it shows Felix as the honorable, bright face of the West. He is depicted as a just person. He is always in search of truth, even if it costs him. He is noble and loyal. He is selfless towards others. All of this represents how the West constructs itself in a beautiful framework that reflects on Safie's education. Whether philosophy, human rights, or democracy, everything belongs to the West. Shelley depicts everything belonging to the West as universal, and through the Turkish father, the other cultural forms are made invisible, not universal, and furthermore, not beautiful. How do Safie and Felix and the Laceys family, whom she joins in a German village, connect to the monster Frankenstein created in his laboratory? This actually forms the most important point in the story's connection. In the picture, can you see the monster? He is in the window and behind the tree, watching Safie learn the local language through storytelling, writing, and classical literature from the Laceys family. We are presented with an image of the West, educating the woman who needs to be liberated from the influence of the Turkish father. What is crucial to the story is that the monster, after being created in the lab, secretly trains himself by listening to the training Safie receives without anyone else knowing. So this is the monster's training to become human. She writes, Safie finds it disgusting to reside in Turkey after her Christian Arab self is educated in the West. Safie becomes a symbol of breaking away from and rejecting Turkish culture, identity, and geography. Imperialism's influence appears in such moments in Shelley's writing. According to Spivak, Safie, a Muslim and Christian mix daughter, falls into a category between Rhys's reinscription of Bertha as Antoinette in Jane Eyre. I am diverting from Spivak here a little bit. I don't see Safie similar to Antoinette. At least, the Antoinette character in Rhys's White Sargasso Sea has a certain level of voice of her own. She has her own narrative. Safie never has a narrative of her own in this fiction. In a way, we can see some of Rhys's good servant Christophine resembling Safie in the sense that Christophine's story, like Safie's, remains unresolved and indirect. Safie's future also remains uncertain. However, Christophine has a character who takes a stand against imperialism, against imperialist whites. She stands up to Rochester and tells him that whatever she wants him to hear, and as Spivak argues, she is the only speaking subject. In contrast, Safie molds into the Laceys family, and there is a void. She cannot be the subject with her own voice. After the monster gains a second-hand education by secretly eavesdropping on Safie's training, he enters the house to talk to the blind man when the rest of the family is not home. While the two are conversing, the rest of the family suddenly enters, is terrified when they see the monster, and attacks him. There are a few elements here that need to be considered. I think it is very symbolic. Let's consider the blind man. We can symbolize this visual unseen as making his own judgment without society's interference, which allows him to see the human aspect of the monster. Without the interaction of society, he can communicate with the lab-made creature. We can think of this from the point of view of how society's influence changes perspectives and opinions. Labels and stigmatization of people creates prejudice against such types of people. We can perceive this as how the West colors the other. Another important factor is that Felix beats the monster while sitting next to his father. This can be symbolized as the approach of the Western male towards the colonized and demonized subaltern. Felix's sister fainting and Safie running away can be expressed as our inability to move away from the comfort zones created by colonization and inability to face the results of colonialism. Safie, also constructed as the other, might choose to flee rather than confront the situation, turning her back and seeking to distance herself from the erasure of history, culture, and memory. Safie, in fact, appears as an other who has undergone westernization processes, accepted to the point of self-denial. As we said, a silenced other. We could interpret this as being disturbed when she sees herself reflected in the mirror, witnessing a process of othering. We could also see it as a moment of terror about how she would be received if she hadn't gone the process of self-construction. I think reactions to the monster are crucial for analysis because the monster, who has its own feelings, thoughts, and human characteristics, doesn't appear human from the outside. And as people and society react, it gradually loses its human qualities, transforming into an angry being completely consumed by anger. Then the question arises, are we really seeing a monster that exists formed from within itself? Or is it because society dehumanizes by labeling, stigmatizing, and forming prejudice against individuals, dictating how we should perceive them, that we are unable to reveal and share our human qualities? How do people in colonized countries, when focused to interpret themselves through the lens of Western behavior, react? Do they either turn into angry beings or, like Safie, begin to experience a horror directed at themselves? I think Safie is a tool of worlding, as she enables us to see the native through the eyes of the West. Surprisingly, Spivak doesn't analyze Safie through worlding in the text, even though she defined and enriched the term. How does Spivak define worlding? Worlding happens when the native sees through the eyes of the West, internalizes that knowledge, and then establishes it, the knowledge coming from the West, as the only valid knowledge. So why do I see Mary Shelley's portrayal of Safie's process as an example of worlding? Because Shelley, while presenting Safie as experiencing the process of liberation in the West, actually shows us an element shaped by the West and unable to voice its own opinion much, because we never hear her own voice, but we are made to believe that she is liberated solely because she is Westernized by the Westerners. Even the Turkish image presented to us as Safie's perception, the idea that she rejected her own culture, her own father, her own background, her own history, and her own memory, is provided to us by Western imagery through the monster and not directly from her own voice. Because Safie constructed is given to her by the West, the construction of Safie given by the West and validated by it, Safie is a passive tool in creating worlding. She is still the subaltern, she still cannot speak. We hear that Safie came to the West. She received an education, she learned to read, she learned to write, she learned to think, but we don't hear any of this from Safie's own mouth. We don't see how she combined it with her own experiences. Mary Shelley, the liberated woman with authorial power, tells us that Safie was liberated. The Western construct tells us how Safie is. This is entirely related to the issue of worlding that Spivak conveys us. The portrait you see before you belongs to the Romantic English poet Lord Byron. Now you'll say, how did we jump to Lord Byron? It is crucial to understand the social background and historical context in which the texts were written and the process of perception through which they were formed. Spivak doesn't do this with Mary Shelley. I now look at what constructed Shelley's approaches, backgrounds, and historical position as an author. Lord Byron was a very influential figure in the writing of Frankenstein. It was actually his idea to write such a Gothic novel. He was also very influential in Mary Shelley's writing. For example, it is said that he was highly influential in the character's emergence and quite active in shaping how Dr. Victor Frankenstein should be portrayed. His influence doesn't end there. Lord Byron has a perception rooted in his own writings and elevates and glorifies the West through a dichotomy between East and West. The West is always good, beautiful, philosophical. The East is tyrannical and in darkness. You see this in Shelley's writing in the character of Safie, who completely rejects her father and the East, preferring her Christian side and the newly found West. You see directly how this dichotomy is created in the writing. Analyzing these texts by identifying the author's origin is very important for deconstructing them. Lord Byron fought against the Ottomans in the Greek War of Independence in the 1820s. He died there. Therefore, his Christian perspective is profound and influential in his writing and in shaping the opinions of those around him. From this point, we can focus on the story of the monster Victor Frankenstein created in the laboratory to further explore the connection to imperialism. In today's world, Frankenstein's monster is commonly depicted as green. But in the book, it is a bit different. I am including a likeness to the contemporary one to consider how the image of the monster evolved in time. To me, the green image indicates a further distance from perceiving it as a human being. The book's narrative shows us Frankenstein and his creation process of a being in the laboratory. In the creative process, Victor Frankenstein is portrayed as a person constantly struggling with himself, experiencing ups and downs, both physically and emotionally and psychologically, going through dark moments, and as a man whose emotional world is very volatile. This is reflected in his physical structure. He becomes weak. But at the same time, while saying all this, the author, Mary Shelley, tells us that he has an inner magnificence, a delicacy, that he is gentle, that he is an impressive person. As I told you about Felix, we also need to pay attention to how Shelley creates the image of the Western male for us. She never creates a 100% evil character. She creates a much more complex personality through her writing as the Western male. That is the problem with the Eastern image. It is mostly depicted singular. Of course, not everyone in the East is going to be good in every situation, but the singularity of negative characteristics is the issue in creating worlding. How is this Western white male imagined when he is transformed into a creator? Spivak tells us that Frankenstein, compared to Jane Eyre, doesn't speak from the perspective of feminist individualism. What is the reason for this? Spivak says it's because, of course, the way the subject is created. Because where was the subject created? Artificially, in a laboratory. In Jane Eyre and the Wide Sargasso Sea, the subject is created through family and womanhood, especially in Jane Eyre, by comparing Jane with Bertha. By bringing Jane to a legal point, you see sexual production, family, and woman. On the other hand, in Rhys's writing, you see the production of the subject through social production of race and the male, for example, became apparent when Christophine and Rochester were compared. Spivak tells us that Mary Shelley's dualistic opposition is absent in Frankenstein because she creates her monster in a laboratory in an artificial womb environment. This moves her to a different terrain than Jane Eyre and White Sargasso see. So how should we understand Victor Frankenstein? The way this subject is created is important. As Spivak tells us, the way the subject is created surprisingly and powerfully contains an imperialistic discourse. Spivak says that the glorification of the male and the symbol of the womb is the box inside the male head, because the womb is artificial, producing springs from the male brain. The hysterical father can never create a girl, it must be a boy. Spivak states, here, the language of racism, the dark side of imperialism, understood as social mission, combines with the hysteria of masculinism into the withdrawal of sexual reproduction rather than subject constitution. The author tells us that the man arrogantly portrays as the creator of the soul, both usurps God's place and attempts, however futile, to eliminate the woman's physiological privilege. Spivak, in fact, manages to place this monstrous creation within the historical context of time, suggesting that Mary Shelley is trying to convey that we cannot create a society through purely theoretical or natural sciences via social engineering. This implicit critique of such a utilitarian vision is powerful, especially considering the world today. This classic, then, we can argue, will endure, especially in a time when artificial intelligence has advanced so far. This is my depiction of the monster as you are seeing on your screen, reflected from artificial intelligence. I do not know how it is appearing in your mind. I strongly suggest you create your own interpretation based on your own reading. Now, the monster is actually depicted here as a corpse in a body, deprived of childhood, never seen a mother, never seen a father, and it has no past, or if it does, it's a stain, a blind void where it can't distinguish anything. Now, this definition strikes me as very powerful. Why? Because if you think about it, this has been done a lot in the real world's historical past. If you are interested in colonial history, what has been done to a significant number of colonized societies? People are denied their own names and cultures, along with their religions and their way of life. The practice continues until they forgot their own language, religion, culture, even in some cases disconnected from their mothers and fathers. A systemic historical erasure was carried out. Now, Spivak is trying to show us that the monster in the story is something created by imperialism. What she is leading us to understand is that a person who has been severed from their own history and memory can appear like a creature. Colonialism first created colonized people this way, but then turned around and didn't like the outcome, wanted to get rid of it, because they couldn't make them like themselves. In other words, the attempt to change colonized people in this way means they can neither remain themselves nor transform into what West hopes them to become. Because in the eyes of the West, these others cannot be given a sense of self. And perhaps, if there isn't this monstrous other, the West cannot formulate its self. Colonized cannot form a self when they lack their own memory, and because everything is erased in the colonial mission, the colonizer becomes dissatisfied with the resulting products, even though they are the ones erasing the subject position of the other. Ultimately, even the creator himself don't teach that monster what it needs to learn. It learns through the character of Safie, and the creator is not satisfied with that either. The monster is not becoming like Safie, even though she is also born out of an other. So there is an interesting dilemma there between Safie and the monster, and of course, we need to consider that too. The West is incorporating Safie into itself by worlding her as a silenced other. As the daughter of a Muslim Turkish father, she can participate to a certain extent because she has Christian roots in her mother, but other colonized people, symbolized through the monster, couldn't be incorporated. And in the end, the monster is placed on a block of ice. He confesses a crime against his creator and can only be filled with rage. While on this ice raft, he will set himself on fire. We don't see him doing it. The book doesn't end like that, but it leaves that image for us. Just like Antoinette turning into Bertha, setting herself on fire, and creating Jane from her ashes. You can actually see a parallel there, can't you? What is conveyed to the reader when left with an image of self-immolation? This is a being whose existence is impossible. Still, the text, without giving us a definite end, leaves us in a puzzle. I am concluding my analysis of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and Spivak's analysis here. I added certain things to Spivak's reading. What is your reading? Interpretations can go further depending on your social position, your geography, and identity. Postcolonial theories are important, thought-provoking, and provide a theoretical framework that allows us to perceive the world differently. They are profound indeed. Please leave us your comments, your own interpretations. I hope we continue to think together. Have hopeful theories. See you soon.